Is the Chancellor's autumn statement a vote winner? Is legal migration too high? And why energy bills are about to go up? This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative MP Stephen Hammond, Labour's Mayor of West Yorkshire Tracy Brabin, Naomi Smith from Best for Britain, which campaigns for a closer relationship with Europe, and Conservative commentator Albi Amankona. Today,
an autumn statement for growth, which I commend to the House.
As the dust settles on the Chancellor's autumn statement, will the measures he announced leave you better off?
Even if you take account of frozen thresholds, after the national insurance cut, there's going to be more money in people's pockets.
People can see in their bank balances that after 13 years of Conservative government, they're worse off, not better off.
We'll be discussing the detail and asking if it makes a spring election more likely. New figures show record levels of net migration to the UK last year.
We are seeing more coming from non-EU countries, we're seeing more coming for study and work, and we're also seeing them stay for longer, so and bringing their dependents with them.
And energy bills will rise from January, putting more pressure on households. Let's take a look at the front pages and their verdict on the autumn statement. Starting with the Daily Telegraph. Biggest tax cuts since the 1980s, with a picture of the Chancellor there. If we roll on to the Mail front page, it has a slightly different headline. We're just stuck on the Telegraph, but it says broadly... still the Telegraph. We've gone straight to the Sun. OK, mini budget boost in January. New Year's wahey. That, of course, also relating to the fact that duty is frozen on all your party booze. Let's see the next headline. There it is, the Daily Mail. Biggest tax cut since the 1980s, but with total burdens still vast. Let's hope it's just the start. The Daily Mirror has a completely different take, unsurprisingly. Autumn statement swizz, they call it. Do they take us all for fools? National insurance cut, but tax overall will remain high. And then the Financial Times. The headline there is tax burden surges despite Hunt cuts. Well, as we saw there, taxes are still going up overall despite the tax cuts announced by the Chancellor. But will those tax cuts that were announced by him yesterday, Stephen, be popular?
I think they will be popular because 28.5 million people are going to benefit from this. He set out a strategy, and the government has set out a strategy about reducing inflation, securing and boosting growth. And you saw that through yesterday's autumn statement. The tax cut was a tax cut that helped work and wasn't inflationary. You've seen that there's growth in every year of the next 5 years. And the biggest advantage yesterday was the thing that actually doesn't catch the headlines, which is the full expensing and the stuff for small businesses. Small businesses are the lifeblood of this economy, and we need to make sure they have as much chance of success as possible.
Will the tax cuts on national insurance be popular with voters?
Well, it's quite a budget, isn't it? And they are quite diverse headlines. And I do really go for the Mirror one. Do they take us all for fools? Because prices are still rising, people are still struggling. We know that this is a government out of ideas. It's the death rattle of a dying government with a flatlining economy. And certainly the national insurance cut, that's going to be completely wiped out by the frozen threshold. So do they take us for fools is my take.
What about you, Naomi? Is it a vote winner?
Well, I think it's a damage limitation exercise. I think the polls are showing that the Conservatives are not heading into the next general election, which will almost certainly now happen in 2024, not going in their favour. So I think this was about trying to claw back some support. Snap polling said, 58% of people are supporting these measures, but 49% to 23%. They just say that the government's plan for the economy isn't working. They're not feeling better off, and I don't think that this autumn statement is likely to do much to make them feel better off in time for an election.
What do you think, Albie? Are they and will they be popular, these tax cuts?
Well, I think from what Naomi's just told us, they are popular. 58% of people are in favour of the tax cuts, and they are already popular measures. The question is will these tax cuts be enough, and will this autumn statement be enough to reverse the awful polling that we see for the Conservatives? There's not been much evidence of that yet. But I think, broadly speaking, the easing of the tax burden is a good thing. But, of course, by the end of this Parliament, the tax burden will be higher than it was than at the beginning of this Parliament because of fiscal drag, because of the income tax thresholds, which are still frozen. Right,
and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, the cut, the sort of headline, if you like, from the autumn statement, the cuts in national insurance from 12% to 10% for workers, has been rushed through. It's going to come in from January in just a few months' time, and that's prompted speculation about an election sooner rather than later. Let's talk to the BBC's chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. What do you think?
Well, it's one of Westminster's favourite parlour games. It has been for a long time, really. Will Rishi Sunak go earlier than we think? Perhaps in the spring when people are feeling a bit more optimistic, the evenings are a bit lighter. Perhaps some people say a winter election wouldn't be the wisest thing to do because you'll have problems in the NHS, as there often are in the winter. Perhaps it will come after a summer of small boat crossings. On the other side of the argument, have you seen the polls? It's not usually the case that prime ministers who are in trouble, who are nearing the end of their terms, decide to call an election earlier than they need to. Gordon Brown certainly didn't. James Callaghan didn't. John Major didn't. I think what we can take from the autumn statement yesterday from National Insurance coming in earlier than the new tax year is they're certainly giving themselves the option. But when I was walking around Parliament after the autumn statement, asking ministers, MPs what they thought, I think they all thought that the polls, that the dial would have to shift a little bit if Rishi Sunak did go ahead with an election sooner than we think.
Interesting. Henry Zeffman, thank you very much. Just briefly with our politicians, what do you think? And when do you think it should be, Stephen?
I think Henry's right. It was a parlour game. My phone was alive yesterday afternoon from all the media asking the same question. The reality is, I think that what you saw yesterday was the start of a strategy which is going to see the economy continue to improve. And I think people will start to feel more of a benefit. It's likely that inflation will fall again. It's likely that interest rates will start to come down, so mortgages will start to come down. There's a lot of help in here.
But so what, you think October still?
So I still think that the government will want to show that actually come this time next year, the economy's looking in a much better state. People will be feeling it.
All right.
And there are options available.
When do you think it should be?
Well, I mean, the people are talking about March, aren't they? I think May sounds sensible because you've got the local elections. And if you're going to be frugal, Joe, then you do it when there's another election because it costs a fortune to run elections.
Yes, and you'll have the locals
sounds
as well.
Like a lot of sense.
Let's just have a look at a couple of tweets. This is from the Conservative Party's official Twitter account, underlining what Jeremy Hunt has been saying about tax cuts. You can say Conservatives cut taxes. It's just what we do. Largest ever tax cut for workers, with Rishi Sunak there. And on the next one, it says the biggest tax cut in British history. Quite a claim. We're helping businesses invest for less by making full expensing, which is what Stephen was talking about, permanent. But there's a problem with these tweets, isn't there, Stephen? Because taxes are still going up. Because although the government cut taxes yesterday, they've previously raised them by a far larger amount. And we got the figure of that for 28-29 yesterday from the official Office for Budget Responsibility. It's a whopping 37.7%, even higher than was forecast before. Why can't you be honest with the public about what's going on here?
We are being honest with we've been very honest with the public. What a lot of people are forgetting, of course, is that we had COVID, where this government had to put in support much greater than any Conservative government would ever expected to spend. And we have to pay that back.
Yeah,
and
but then be honest.
That's one of the reasons.
Be honest. Don't say this is the biggest tax cut ever, that people will be paying less tax. By 28-29, the tax take as a percentage of GDP will be 37.7%. Higher than after the crash, higher than the recession under the Tories in the 1990s.
But that, Joe, is if this strategy doesn't work and this economy doesn't continue to improve. And there's every possibility that, as I say, that if this is as I expect the economy to improve, the Chancellor will continue to use that headroom to take away the tax burden.
Sorry, I'm going to stick with you just a bit longer. Hang on, because the office...
That's based on current numbers.
Yeah, but, well, right, but what else is it going to be based on? The Office for Budget Responsibility has concluded that themselves with all the numbers. They've looked at all the numbers. They've taken into account everything Jeremy Hunt announced and has presented to them to be scrutinised. And they are still saying your government is going to raise taxes. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but you're going to raise taxes to a historic high of nearly 38%.
On the current basis, that is correct, and no one's trying to hide that, and no one's trying to mislead the public. But yesterday, there was, as Jeremy Hunt laid out, a tax cut other that would have been there otherwise, which benefits 28 million people. And, as I have said, that number is based on current numbers. And Jeremy Hunt has made it very clear, as has Rishi Sunak, that as the economy continues to improve, we intend to ease the tax burden.
Well, Stephen talks about COVID and the impact of that on the public purse. At Best Britain, we have something called the Scandalous Spending Tracker. And this week, it topped 100 billion of waste by this government, 6 billion on crony contracts during the pandemic, 10 billion on outrageous outgoings, things like art for Downing Street, 84 billion in duff deals, stuff that was scrapped, didn't work, cancelled parts of HS2. It isn't credible to claim to be the party of economic responsibility when they've wasted 100 billion. And when it comes to how voters are feeling, actually voters don't mind so much a very high tax burden that we now have when they are getting value for money, when they are seeing that back in public services. But you can't get a GP appointment. NHS waiting times are through the roof. The police won't come out when you're burgled. People aren't feeling the impact of paying that much more tax.
Right, well, you say that, but Tracy, we've had Labour politicians, and we heard again yesterday from Darren Jones, who's Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, about the fact that you want to bring taxes down too. I mean, you agree. Are you going to, or would you vote for the cut in national insurance?
Well, look, let's get to the point of this, that these tax cuts are tax cuts that are on the back of cuts to public spending. And so when you're talking to the public, what they're seeing is not necessarily the 10p in their pocket, is the fact that they have poor public services. And I was just on a meeting with my local authority leaders this morning before I came here. They are stunned. There was nothing for local authorities and public services where that safety net has completely been eroded by this government. So they have used the headroom. They could have spent it on public services, and they could have spent it on health and education. And they're choosing to have this tax cut that is a pre-election sweetie that actually doesn't even make sense.
But do you agree with it? You agree with the tax cut?
Well, of course I want to see more money in people's pockets.
Well, fine.
Absolutely.
Well, but taking on that, the Daily Telegraph, Albie, you're looking sceptical at what has just been said, but public spending to plunge by £19 billion in real terms over the next 5 years. I mean, was that the right choice to give a tax cut rather than putting that money into public services?
There'll be a lot of Conservative voters who want public spending to go down. Public spending has ballooned in this country.
And actually, sorry, they want their health centre to close. They want their care home to close.
Tracy, if I can just make this point. I think we need to have an honest conversation about why public spending is going up. It's because we have an ageing population, a shrinking labour force, and we don't have a very productive economy in the United Kingdom in order to afford all the public services that we need. And if we continue having this conversation about waste, yes, that's reprehensible, but not about the secular trend which is pushing public spending up, parliament after parliament after parliament. We're going to be stuck in this doom loop of high tax, high spend and low growth. We need to have an honest conversation about that, don't we?
I think the doom loop has been caused by 13 years of a Conservative government who have tanked the economy. The doom loop of a Liz Truss budget that sent inflation through the roof, that meant people couldn't put food on the table because they're worried about their energy bills. And let me tell you, in our communities, people are desperate for public services to be paid for properly.
Right, but can I just come back to the issue then of public spending? Because actually Labour aren't committing to putting any more money into, certainly, the NHS. They keep talking about reform. Do you disagree with your own party on that you would like to see taxes go up and money from those taxes to go into public services.
No, I don't disagree, but the whole system of the way it's been working, where we've had beauty contests from the centre given to local authorities or mayors, where you have to bid in and you can't have the money that you need for your services, whether that's housing, education,
but Tracy, if you support the tax cuts, and Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, did too, the cuts to national insurance, then you can't have that same money go into public services.
But you know that public services are not just one itemised item, are they? They are health, they are housing, and the Labour Party have committed to 1.5 million new homes. We come to it from different angles.
Yeah, but Tracy, these are two tax rises that bring in about. They did. No, he did. But it's a choice that it sounds like the Labour Party agrees with. I mean, the Labour Party have backed this cut in national insurance. This, what we call this headroom, this £19 billion, is going to leave public services starved of cash. Not perhaps just yet, but it is going to have a knock-on effect. And you can't have both. That's what we will say to the Conservatives too. But this could be a Labour government dealing with this, and you will have to find the money. Will it come from tax rises?
Well, look, to boost the economy regionally, what you need to do is you need to improve, for example, transport. There was nothing in this autumn statement that was additional to what we've heard, which was the decision taken by Rishi Sunak to cut HS2 and then divvy it out across the country and call it a northern network. We know that the incoming Labour government absolutely understand that to boost your economy, you need to get people to jobs and to skills, and they are committed to working with mayors to do that and to do it
Tracy,
efficiently.
don't you think we should spend as much as we take in tax in this country? Isn't that the core of this problem, is that we have this deficit that we still haven't managed to close just yet? And as long as we have that deficit, we'll either have to raise taxes in order to bring in that revenue or take out debt. With interest rates going up, we'll have to be paying more interest rate payments. It's an insolvable problem. And Labour doesn't seem to have an answer either.
It's also where you choose to spend it. And we know that levelling up has absolutely failed under the Conservatives. Utterly failed.
What would you do differently?
Well, we know that we have to rebalance the economy, and we know that the way to do that is to give more power and more money to regional leaders, because they know their communities and they know how to solve these problems, and to get more bang for your buck.
Going to regional leaders yesterday. That was all announced in the autumn statement. More money going to regional leaders.
Well, to investment zones.
Yeah, precisely. Don't you want investment zones?
Well, of course I want investment zones.
So there's a good, way of putting more money in.
Yes,
and also, you know, you've talked about getting the transport system there. The one thing that voters were saying was that they wanted Network North rather than HS2. Now, you and I can argue about the benefit.
Who was saying that?
Well, that's what some of the polling showed.
Well, we need to connect up the big cities across our country.
I don't disagree with that.
And it was one of the biggest European infrastructure projects, and it was cut on a whim by an unelected Prime Minister.
And he is the Prime Minister of this country. You know, we had an unelected Prime Minister in Gordon Brown, so we can all play that game. It's not a very clever game. I mean, the fact of the matter is that are you going to replace HS2?
Well, look, when his own infrastructure advisor is telling the Prime Minister that this actually ruins our credibility across the whole of Europe, I would actually go with that view rather than a view that is what can we cut and how can we make it look like we're trying to help.
Well, hang on, Stephen.
We're unravelling.
I want to go. Well, no, I want to go back to what Tracy said about choices, Stephen, because there were choices. Why was it more responsible to cut taxes than use that money for public services?
Well, it was more responsible because, as we've discussed earlier on, the tax burden on people is rising and will continue to do. So if we should,
and also, government,
yes, and also, as Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak have laid out, we want to see growth in the economy. We want to reward work. And this is a way. There are plenty of other options in terms of the choices about which tax you make, but a tax that supports people who are in work and actually grows the economy.
Well, we don't know if it'll grow. We don't know if it'll grow the economy. Well, I heard Jeremy Hunt say the OBR. I heard that from the Office for Budget Responsibility.
Well, the OBR have said it will grow the economy. Maybe not as much as anyone would like.
Well,
But it is saying it will grow the economy.
But Stephen, let's just remind everybody that the OBR downgraded
Yeah.
growth
Yeah.
quite
Downgraded
massively
for
this year,
2024 and
for next
2025.
year and the year after. So this growth and I have to say Labour are also saying it's all going to come from growth, but this magical growth that you're talking about has been downgraded for now.
Yes, it has.
Right.
But it is still growth in every year in the next 5 years.
Yeah, but far less than was
forward.
expected for this year, next year and the year after.
And off the
But
back of a
inflation
very
is going up.
disastrous Conservative budget under Liz Truss, the effects of which we are still feeling. So, you know, last year, 85% of mortgages were fixed rate, as opposed to, I think, about 50% pre-financial crisis. And that means that the effects of that interest rate rise have not actually been fully felt yet by a lot of people who are still on a fixed-term mortgage. That comes into play middle of next year and beyond.
Right.
That's when people are going to be feeling much worse off than they are right now, despite all of this.
As inflation
and I think
continues
that
to fall.
Yes, although it's taking a long time, isn't it, to get back to the 2%, which is the Bank of England target, not till 2025.
Prices are still rising.
Well, yes, prices are. That's the point about inflation. But, I mean, actually, that's the Bank of England is the target, and it should get it there. But it is on a trajectory to get back there.
Why does the government keep saying we've cut inflation, then?
And the point about it is that as inflation falls, so mortgage rates will fall.
Well, can I just go back to something that Albie said, which is about a discussion about the amount of money people pay in tax and the amount of money that goes into public services? Because there is another option, which Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, suggested this week on the programme, which is put taxes up. Put taxes up, have a wealth tax, have a tax on assets and dividends and properties, unearned income, and put that into public services. What about that as an option?
I've long been in favour of a much more redistributive taxation system. We need to be taxing the idle wealthy rather than the so-called idle poor who aren't. You know, taxing income over wealth, I think, is much less of an equal and equitable way to do things, and does have a much less effective impact on growth and redistribution of wealth around the country. If we want to talk about levelling up, well, wealth taxes would certainly be
where
one
have
way to
wealth
do it.
taxes worked, Naomi?
Well, why do we have capital gains tax at all?
Where have wealth taxes worked in the world?
Well, look, we have land value taxation systems in
it's interesting that you
other
didn't answer.
countries.
Look, I think the point...
I am answering a question.
So where have wealth taxes worked?
They do work. We are not performing well as a country. We have had stagnant growth, stagnant wages, and now a projection that isn't looking brilliant on the growth front, as per what we've just heard in terms of OBR forecasts for growth in 2024, 2025 having been revised down. So the status quo isn't working, and it surely makes sense to tax unearned income and idle wealth as opposed to those that are productive means, that are people employing others, corporations that are employing people, getting the economy going. I think you should take the tax burden off income and onto wealth. It makes sense.
Neither of the parties here, Labour or the Conservatives, are proposing that at the moment. And actually, Albie, perhaps you can respond to this story. BBC News, the energy price cap will rise in January, adding pressure on households. We can see a tweet from the money-saving expert Martin Lewis, who has spelt it out very clearly in terms of what people will be paying. New 5% higher price cap means people will pay more this January than any winter before, which, when you think back to last year, of course, we had the support guarantee from the government, which is why it will actually be higher. How are people going to manage?
Look, support from the government by way of price caps cannot last forever. It's just simply unaffordable. And this is what I talk about when I say we need to have an honest conversation about the things that we can afford in this country. There will be some pain, but there are areas that we can make savings. For example, if we look at the state pension, for example, did it really need to go up by 8.5%? I thought it was very...
You don't agree with the triple lock?
No, I don't agree with the triple lock. I think it needs to go. And actually, I thought one of the most interesting parts of the budget yesterday was when Jeremy Hunt said we're raising the state pension by 8.5% because there are 1 million pensioners for whom they rely on the state pension completely. There's always an argument that means testing is too difficult to do, but the government know that there is a portion of pensioners who rely on the state pension. Why not give them 8.5%, and the rest of the pensioner population who can afford to have other revenue sources a lower increase?
All right, I'm going to stick with the energy prices, because the money that will come back into people's pockets from national insurance cut, broadly £450 if you're earning, I think it was around £35,000 a year, which is what Jeremy Hunt said yesterday. They're going to have to put some of that onto their energy bills, aren't they? It's going to be taken away in those higher than ever, it seems, energy bills.
Well, some of that money people will have to spend because energy prices are rising. But the thing that is key yesterday was in the depths of the budget you saw there was a measure to help vulnerable people over the winter in terms of unfreezing the local housing allowance, and that is going to give the most vulnerable people in our country another £800 a year, which would start to move in terms of the support. And as you rightly pointed out, there was a huge energy support last year.
Yes, there was. But, I mean, would you want to see a Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves do more, continue, extend some of that support for the increases again?
Well, I must say, just listening to Albie saying, well, some people have got to feel the pain, I think there's a massive disconnect with decision makers and politicians and people like you. Hang on. And people like yourself who obviously have no idea what it's like for people going hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, trying to put food on the table for their children.
So tell us how you pay for it.
Where mayors have to step in, like myself, with a cost of living crisis fund of £3 million for warm spaces, for food banks and for support with mental health. This is impacting on a daily basis the most vulnerable. And you are very happy to say, well, some people must feel the pain and it won't necessarily be you.
No, what I'm saying is that people who can afford not to live from state handouts, who don't need them, shouldn't get them. We should redistribute the money from people who don't need the money, for example, a fifth of pensioners who are millionaires, to the very people who are talking about. Naomi over here has said she would raise taxes in order to fund the services that people on lower incomes need. You have not said you would raise taxes. You have, in fact, said you agree with what the government have done on tax. So at least be honest and say how you want to pay for the extra support. I've said we'll do efficiencies elsewhere. Naomi has said she'd raise taxes.
Oh, well.
What would you do?
Well, my job is a different job to a politician in central government. My job is place over politics. I am here as a representative of the people of West Yorkshire, and what matters to me is that they get a fair deal. And this budget does absolutely nothing for the people of West Yorkshire.
Let's talk about let's talk about net migration. As we said in the headlines, that's legal migration, the number of people coming in, as contrasting the number of people leaving. The headline is net migration to the UK hit record 745,000 in 2022. Revised figures even show the Office for National Statistics raises the previous figure by 140,000. Stephen, the Conservative manifesto in 2019 pledged to take back control of our borders following our exit from the EU and reduce overall levels of immigration. Putting the small boats aside, overall levels of migration. And at that time, net migration stood at 226,000. Last year, it was 745,000. It hasn't gone down, it's gone up more than 3 times. Would you like to say now you've failed on that policy and promise?
Well, we clearly haven't met the promise.
Right.
And I'm happy to say that because we clearly haven't. Now, if you want to try and look at some of the reasons why, then let's have that discussion. Some of that number, as everybody is admitting, is due to humanitarian crises in terms of Hong Kong, in terms of Ukraine, in terms of Afghan. The other big rise we've seen is due to foreign students coming in. And also, and I know we'll see something about this, the fact that we are now seeing more workers in the health service coming from abroad than we had initially expected to see.
But
so
the
that's the rationale for it.
Right, but the government's chosen to do that.
That's
so
right.
that promise, so why make a promise that successive Conservative governments have chosen not to keep? They've chosen to have more workers from abroad, from outside the EU, to fill shortage occupations here. That is the vast bulk of the increase. They've chosen to do it. It hasn't happened accidentally.
Well, some of it has happened.
But the bit I'm talking about.
Well, which bit? Are you talking about the fact we shouldn't have taken the humanitarian people?
No, I'm talking about workers. Workers and shortage occupations. Left the EU, you promised to reduce the overall levels of net migration. They've gone up massively, and the government says, after Brexit, we choose who comes here. They've chosen to have 3 times as many people. Some of those, of course, have come, as you say, from Ukraine and Hong Kong, but the vast bulk have come as workers.
Some of them have undoubtedly come as workers. Quite a lot of them have come as students and bringing independence. As your correspondent pointed out, I think in one of the trailers I saw earlier on, that there are a number of causes for it. Yeah, I think that we should have been much clearer at the beginning about which are people who should be on the occupation list that we want to encourage, and we probably should have been more realistic.
Are you committed to still bringing it down, net migration?
The Conservative Party is, yes.
Are you?
Yes.
Is it a good thing? 745,000 net migration?
Yes, immigration is a really good thing for our country. Culturally, economically, it enriches sport. Look where the Premier League would be if we didn't have migration. I love emigration. I love all the grations. Isn't it wonderful for people to be able to travel and learn and love and study and enrich themselves with being exposed to other cultures? And when we look at the facts and figures of it all, migrants pay more into the system than anything they take out in benefits. You are far more likely to be treated by an immigrant in the NHS than behind one in the queue to see a doctor. I think immigration is great. What isn't great is a very laissez-faire attitude to how you manage migration, inward migration into the country. When we look at countries like Canada, they have a much more interventionist approach. The government does a lot more to help people integrate. They have free language lessons, the infrastructure is there, the housing, the extra GP surgeries, the extra schools, all of that happens in a way it doesn't happen in the UK and should.
Albie?
Look, I would describe myself as a moderate Conservative. There's absolutely nothing moderate about 745,000 people net migration in 1 year. That is not a moderate immigration policy.
Why not?
That is a radical immigration policy. The numbers need to come down. Look, I am a product of inward migration into this country. Of course, you can look at me. I'm not a native British person. I'm mixed race, so I'm a product of multiculturalism. But the reason why multiculturalism and integration worked in the 20th century is because the numbers were lower. But today, the numbers are just so high that it's so difficult to integrate these people into society. There are all these awful community tensions that are happening. We have seen over the night in the Netherlands with the election of what some would call a far-right party, what can happen if the people who want to vote for migration to come down time and time again aren't listened to? That's what they voted for the Tories to do. We've not done it.
Naomi, do you accept that?
Well, no. We have...
on the integration question and posing problems, potentially.
So when you ask voters about their views on immigration, it's come right down. It is not a top 10 concern in the way it was ahead of the EU referendum back in 2016. What people want is to know that there is control, and that's why Stop the Boats resonates more with people, because that feels like uncontrolled.
But
and actually, they don't have a problem with controlled. And you ask voters, you know, do you want more immigrants to help fill the vacancies in social care, in the NHS, in schools? They say yes. Do you accept that we should be taking in more foreign students? They say yes. So as soon as you ask people about the detail of immigration, they're very supportive of it.
Well, let's have a look at it politically. Simon Clarke, he was a member of Liz Truss's government, Tory MP. This level of legal immigration, he agrees with Albie, is unsustainable, both economically and socially. There's no public mandate for it, Stephen. It's beyond our public services capacity to support it, and it undercuts UK productivity and wages by substituting cheap foreign labour. He goes on to say we need an urgent change of approach. The earnings threshold for visa applications needs to be raised significantly. The shortage occupations list needs to be radically de-scoped. As set out by the Chancellor, we need to ensure more Britons are supported into work. But let's just focus on the principle. Albie called it a radical immigration policy, not what people voted for.
People voted for the government to take control when they voted for Brexit, and the government making a choice. The government is going to make choices and is making choices. I disagree with Simon. I think that we need to look at the shortage occupation list because I think, as Albie said, immigration is good for the country, provided it's properly controlled and people feel safe. And there are a lot of integration measures happening in my local community as well. What we want to see is to be clear about not confusing illegal immigration.
Well, we're not.
Net migration and refugee. But quite often this discussion does get confused.
Yeah, who do you think does the confusing mainly on this? I mean, you know, we certainly don't on this programme, I hope. Will Labour bring down overall numbers? Will they commit, and should they commit to bringing down overall numbers of net migration?
Well, look, I'm not in those meetings about bringing down net migration, but I do know that actually diversity is our strength and migration is a gift. And in regions like mine, the people coming from Ireland, people coming from South Asia, you know, coming to our community, to our factories, our NHS, that diversity is really, really important. Diversity of thought and diversity of and passion to build new lives. But
is it sustainable in the way Simon Clarke says?
But the key is what happens when people get here, and it is that support into speaking English, being able to integrate, being able to take part in society, and to contribute. And that's what we should be doing, not weaponising this subject.
You mentioned earlier on that Keir Starmer wanted to build 1.5 million homes over the next Parliament. If he's also going to import 1.5 million people, does it even matter that 1.5 million homes are being built?
You're certainly going to need to bring in some workers to build the homes, because we haven't got enough of them in the UK.
But the point is, I believe 45% of new housing demand in this country comes from immigration. We have this housing crisis that lots of people my age like to talk about. It's very important we build more homes. But it's equally important that we get control of migration so that when we actually build more homes, there are more homes for people in the United Kingdom.
If we want growth in the economy and you speak to businesses, they will say we have record low unemployment. We have an enormous number of vacancies across many sectors. But they don't match up to the jobs that are vacant at the moment. And upskilling people takes time. So you have an acute need at the moment, and it makes absolute economic, business and cultural sense to say, yes, we will expand the shortage occupation.
Well, shall I just show you the shortage? I was quite taken aback, actually. These are all of the shortage occupations that are on the government's list that need filling. That is why we have to have workers coming to do those jobs. There are endless numbers of shortage occupations. Now, it may be a good thing, then, to have people coming from abroad to do them. But the government has not only failed to bring down overall levels of migration, which it said it was committed to, it's expanded the number of shortage occupations because they can't get the staff here.
But isn't that utter failure that we should be training people in these jobs where we've had 13 years and we're still desperate for a workforce that's fit for the 21st century?
Well, we are training people. That's why there are more apprenticeships and more things.
So why has this list got bigger and bigger and bigger?
Because obviously we need to recognise there are some skills that we need alongside some skills alongside what the country.
Well, shall I read you some of them? I mean, there are pharmacists, psychologists, medical radiographers, health professionals, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, nurses, secondary education.
Many of whom used to come from the EU when we had freedom of movement for 27
We're training more doctors, more nurses than ever before. We're obviously making sure there is a homegrown workforce. That's why apprenticeships are being supported by this government. That's why you heard Jeremy Hunt yesterday do a number of issues about investments in high-tech and AI as well.
All right, well, let me put a question which you probably would answer. Well, you know very clearly what Naomi thinks, and she celebrates the high levels of net migration. What number do you think it should be? A ballpark? I mean, are we talking tens of thousands was an old commitment by the Conservative
Party? I thought that was a sensible commitment by David Cameron.
Did you really think that was realistic?
Yes, well, maybe not realistic, but you asked me what I thought was sensible, all right. And I think that is a sensible number. Look, we need to do a lot more with training our homegrown workforce. We also need to get the fertility rate up so we aren't reliant on this level of migration.
Tracy's woken up. Tracy's woken up.
I wasn't asleep, but
no,
that
but
was quite
I'm sorry, you weren't asleep at all. But what number would you put would be sensible? Taking the economy now, the shortage occupations lists, what do you think would be a sensible figure?
I've got no real idea, actually, nor does anyone. Because the economy, it's all very well said, but the economy's going to change, demands are going to change. But if you look at what John, I mean, I was looking at some analysis before I came on the show to be properly prepared. What we are going to see in the next couple of years is Jonathan Portis, who is the commentator, saying actually migration from the UK is about to rise fairly substantially over the next 2 or 3 years. And so this net migration number will move again. And you're asking, pick a number at any one point in time. I think it's more important that we have that list that you've talked about reflecting the jobs that we need alongside the people we're training in the country.
It's so reductive talking about numbers as well, because surely it's about an industrial it's an industrial strategy for growth. What are our sectors where we have to boost the training? Where do we see the future of the world of work? This is politicising immigration in a way that is not helpful for our communities, because it all becomes, particularly around small boats, you know, targeting the 2% of the immigration, and you just think this is not a way to run a country, because to run a country where we are going to be in competition with the rest of the world, we have to have the workforce here in our country. And if that means immigration, then we have to work out and be sensible and grown up about
that workforce, which is more of it going into apprenticeships, and we're wanting to see whether your party will support those increasing apprenticeships.
All right, well, let's have a look at this story, finally. In The Sun, roll call. Esther McVey, Conservative MP, she was a Cabinet Minister some Conservative governments ago, appointed Minister for Common Sense by Rishi Sunak with brief to tackle scourge of wokery, that term. Well, that's how The Sun has written it up. She's actually got a job in the Cabinet Office, and it was her first appearance at the dispatch box today since her appointment to answer questions. Let's have a look at what she had to say.
I also have seen the reports in the paper describing me as the Minister of Common Sense, and I appreciate the concept is a difficult one to grasp for the members on the other side of the bench there. But I am committed to delivering common sense decisions such as delaying the ban on petrol and diesel cars, delaying the ban on oil and gas boilers, scrapping HS2, Birmingham to Manchester, reducing the overseas budget, all common sense policies that those on the opposite benches have voted against. This side of the House is full of common sense, and I'm building on all those policies.
What is this role? What's this job she's got, Stephen? Do you understand it?
I think it looks to me like it's two things. One is to work alongside the Cabinet Office to make sure that the common sense, in inverted commas, whatever that might mean.
Is that because they haven't got common sense?
No, but I think it's probably looking at the civil service amongst other matters. And it looks to me like, as you've just heard from that, you'll be seeing a lot of Esther on the media as well.
Oh, I see. So she's got the new role as the sort of media broadcaster, if you like, for the government.
That role, she appeared to be in several departments.
Right.
The
Did it convince you, the need for a common sense czar?
It's quite ironic, isn't it? Esther McVey, common sense czar, I don't know. But it's obviously that Rishi Sunak feels he needs to shore up the far right of the party. You know, it's got the, well,
she might disagree. She might disagree with that term.
She might disagree. The right of the party, and bring somebody with that voice into his cabinet.
Can you see the benefit of somebody in that role?
I don't see the political benefit to Sunak for bringing her in, if indeed it is a kind of sop to the right flank of his party to shore them up, because his other ministerial appointments in the reshuffle were certainly not from their caucus, if you like. I don't think it'll be enough to quieten them down. And, you know, this is somebody who voted against same-sex marriage, refused to back the 2050 net zero target in 2019. You know, if that's common sense, then I think he's got big problems.
Right. What do you think, Albie? Is this a gimmick, more of a gimmick, bringing Esther McVey in to do the things that she has set out, or actually a worthwhile job?
No, I don't think this is a gimmick at all. I think Tracy was actually right to say she's going to be the Minister for the Media. Of course, Esther McVey, until coming into Cabinet, was a colleague of mine over at GB News, where she did a wonderful job presenting a show on a Saturday morning. So she will be the Minister for the Media, going out on the media round, answering difficult questions from journalists like you, Joe, and bashing off politicians like Tracy. Well, I think she'll do very well at the role. And actually, I think it is also right to say that when it came to the Cabinet reshuffle, there wasn't really anyone from the right wing of the Tory party. So I do think it's also true that she's been brought in as a sort of replacement of Suella, if you will.
Is that how you see it, Stephen?
Well, as a leading member of the One Nation caucus, you know that I've been on shows saying that I welcome what the Prime Minister did in terms of the reshuffle, because...
Getting rid of Suella Braverman?
Well, I think in the end that was inevitable, and I think she sealed her own fate. But the fact of the matter is you win elections from camping on the common ground of British politics, not lurching either to the right or the left, as Tracy's party showed us at the last time round. And the key thing is the Prime Minister is setting out a group of sensible policies that actually people are going to support.
Right. And are they common sense policies? Delaying the ban on petrol and diesel cars, delaying the ban on oil and gas boilers, scrapping HS2 Birmingham to Manchester. Were they common sense policies?
I think the not increasing the fuel duty is a common sense policy at this stage when you're talking about energy prices rising, helping people with that cost of living, making work pay, as we've seen today, in that cut in NI, helping 28.5
well,
million
you've
people
gone back
is really important.
You've gone back to where we started. Well, thank you for all your common sense, arguably, on this programme today. That's all we have time for on Politics Live. I will be back on Monday with more at 12:15, and Politics UK will be on tomorrow at the same time. From all of us here, bye-bye.